"Do not sign that." The words came from the woman everyone had been trying not to see. 12 interpreters had already failed inside Matteo De Luca's private boardroom, and one wrong sentence was about to hand New York's harbor routes to a rival who smiled like he had already counted the bodies. At the far end of the black marble table, Clara Whitmore stood frozen in a gray cleaning uniform, yellow rubber gloves still wet from wiping spilled red wine. Her large soft frame framed by velvet chairs, black suits, and the cold glitter of a chandelier. Every man turned. Victor Hale, the polished interpreter in a navy-tailored suit, snapped first. "The cleaner does not speak at this table." A few men laughed under their breath. Someone near the wall muttered that she was blocking the cameras. Clara's gloved fingers tightened on the edge of the marble, but she did not step back. Matteo De Luca did not move either. He sat in the center chair like a knife left in shadow, white, handsome, ruthless, his tattooed throat visible above an open black collar, two bodyguards behind him already reaching inside their jackets. He had not asked Clara to speak. He had not defended her. He only watched. Across from him, Nikolai Orlov's envoy kept smiling while Victor repeated the translation in English, smooth as expensive poison. "He says the Eastern docks remain neutral until winter." Clara heard the original words still hanging in the air, not in English, not clean, not neutral. Her stomach sank. The phrase had been softened, shaved down, stripped of its teeth. Neutral did not mean neutral. Winter did not mean winter. And the word Victor had skipped entirely meant blood debt. Clara had learned languages the way other women learned how to disappear. In hotel kitchens, ferry terminals, late-night diners by the ports, from immigrant grandmothers who tipped in coins and lonely sailors who thought a cleaning lady was furniture. Spanish prayers, Russian curses, Italian threats, Polish jokes, Arabic bargaining, Greek grief. Enough to survive. Enough to know when a man was lying with another man's mouth. "I said remove her," Victor hissed, his eyes flicking to her gloves as if the yellow rubber proved she had no right to understand him. One bodyguard stepped forward. Clara's shoes held to the polished floor. Her body, so often treated like an inconvenience in narrow halls and crowded elevators, became the one steady thing in a room full of shifting weapons. She looked at the wet streak her glove had left across the marble. Beneath the shine, where Victor's folder had been dragged too quickly aside, a line of blue ink showed through. The same phrase the envoy had just spoken, written in 3 languages, each one sharper than Victor's lie. Clara swallowed once. Her voice did not rise. "He didn't say neutral," she said. The room went so silent the chandelier seemed to hum. Matteo's eyes lifted fully to hers for the first time. Not soft, not kind, interested, dangerous. Victor went pale around the mouth. Clara kept her hand on the marble, yellow glove trembling but not retreating. "He said the docks stay open only if you accept the debt your father refused." Somewhere behind Matteo, a safety clicked off. Nikolai's envoy stopped smiling, and Matteo De Luca, the most feared man in the room, raised one finger before anyone could touch her. Matteo's raised finger stopped 3 armed men before Clara could decide whether to breathe. The bodyguard closest to her froze with one hand inside his jacket. Victor Hale's mouth remained open, polished and furious, while Nikolai's envoy stared at Clara as if a mop had suddenly spoken Latin. Her yellow gloves squeaked softly against the black marble, a small, humiliating sound in a room built to swallow women like her whole. Matteo did not thank her. He did not smile. He only looked from the wet streak beneath her hand to the blue ink under Victor's folder, and that silence was more frightening than shouting. Clara knew silence. She had been living inside it for years. At the De Luca estate, silence was part of the uniform, stitched as tightly as the gray polyester across her broad hips and soft stomach. Cleaning staff entered after midnight, spoke only when spoken to, and disappeared before men in black suits returned with blood under their cufflinks and expensive cologne hiding gun oil. Clara had learned where to stand so no one bumped her, how to turn her large body sideways through narrow service halls without apologizing out loud, how to keep her face calm when a rich guest looked through her, as if she were a stain on the wall. The world had always treated her size as proof of everything it wanted to believe about her. Slow, simple, careless, beneath notice. So Clara made beneath notice useful. She remembered which men switched languages when they lied. She remembered the Russian driver who always crossed himself before entering Mateo's West Wing. She remembered the Sicilian cook who cursed Victor Hale under his breath because Victor corrected accents for sport. She remembered the Polish housekeeper who cried in the laundry room and taught Clara the phrase, "for a promise made with a knife behind the back." 8 languages had not arrived like a miracle. They had collected on her skin during 12 years of night shifts, bus rides, motel corridors, ferry terminals, and kitchens where lonely people spoke freely because they believed the fat cleaning woman would never matter. Clara never told them they were wrong. Tonight, standing under the chandelier with her glove leaving a damp crescent on Mateo De Luca's table, she wished invisibility still worked. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice to something silkier and uglier. "You misheard a technical phrase. Go back to your cart before you embarrass yourself further." A few men looked away, relieved to have permission to doubt her again. Clara's throat tightened, but her chin stayed level. "I know what I heard. For words. No apology. No pleading." Mateo's eyes narrowed, not at her body, not at her uniform, but at the place her hand had uncovered the ink. Then his gaze cut to the ceiling corner. A red camera light blinked once. "Bring up the last 5 minutes," he said. The nearest bodyguard moved to the wall panel. Another step behind Clara, blocking the door she had used to enter. The room seemed to shrink around her. Mateo finally spoke to her directly, his voice low enough to turn every face still. "Miss Whitmore, you're going to tell me exactly how much you understood." "Exactly how much?" Clara repeated, because the question sounded less like curiosity and more like a loaded gun placed gently on the table. The door behind her was no longer open. One bodyguard stood in front of it, broad shoulders blocking the service hall she had used every night without anyone noticing. On the far wall, the security screen flickered to life, showing Clara's own yellow-gloved hand sliding across the black marble 5 minutes earlier, uncovering the blue ink Victor had tried to hide. Mateo De Luca watched the footage once. He did not blink. Then he tapped one finger against the table, and the room obeyed the sound. No one coughed. No one shifted. Even Nikolai's envoy sat still, his smile thinned to a white scar. This was the first thing Clara truly understood about Mateo's world. Power here did not need volume. It lived in silence, in bodyguards changing position before an order was spoken, in black suits standing beneath crystal chandeliers with their hands loose and ready, in a locked room where a cleaning lady could become evidence simply because the boss decided she was not allowed to leave yet. Mateo sat at the head of it all, white shirt open beneath a black jacket, throat tattoo curling above his collar, dark eyes cutting from a screen to Clara with the patience of a man who could wait all night for a lie to die. 8 minutes ago, he said, "You were wiping my table. Now my interpreter wants you removed. My rival has stopped smiling, and my guards are waiting for me to decide if you are useful or dangerous." Clara felt the words settle on her skin. Useful or dangerous. Not innocent. Not safe. Never safe. Victor gave a short, offended laugh. "Mateo, this is absurd. She cleans after meetings. She hears fragments, gossip, servant nonsense. She doesn't understand diplomatic structure." Clara did not look at Victor. Looking at him would make him the center of the room again, and she had spent too many years watching powerful men steal the air. Instead, she kept her eyes on Mateo. Her knees ached from standing. Her shoulders burned beneath the stiff gray uniform, and every inch of her large body felt exposed under the chandelier, but she did not fold inward. "I understood enough to know he changed obligation into neutrality," she said, "and debt into weather." A bodyguard's hand paused halfway to his earpiece. Mateo's gaze sharpened, but he still did not soften. "Which languages?" he asked. Clara's gloved thumb pressed once against her palm. Enough for that sentence. The smallest flicker crossed Mateo's mouth. Not amusement, not approval, something colder and more interested. He slid Victor's folder across the marble, toward her with 2 fingers. then read the line he covered. Victor moved too fast. His hand shot down, pinning the folder before it reached Clara. The crack of his palm against marble made several men flinch. "No," Victor said, his voice no longer polished. "She touches that file, and this entire table becomes a circus." His eyes dragged over Clara's uniform, her gloves, her body, all the things he thought could make the room dismiss her again. "Let the cleaner prove she belongs here," he said, smiling thinly. "Make her read it out loud." Victor's smile sharpened when no one laughed. "Come on, Miss Whitmore," he said, loud enough for every black suit along the walls to hear. "You wanted to interrupt men negotiating territory. Read." He shoved the folder across the black marble, but before it reached Clara, he caught it by the corner and looked pointedly at her yellow rubber gloves. "Actually, no. Take those off. I would hate for the cleaner to smear ammonia over a binding agreement and call it scholarship." A low ripple moved through the room. Not quite laughter. Worse than laughter, the sound of powerful men being given permission to treat her as dirt with a pulse. Clara felt heat climb her throat. The gloves were still damp, the cuffs tucked under the sleeves of her gray uniform. The same uniform that made guests leave empty glasses beside her without looking at her face. She did not remove them. "If the paper is that important," she said quietly, "you should not be sliding it through wine and cleaning solution." The ripple died. Victor's eyes flashed. "Careful," he murmured. "Large women are often mistaken for brave when they're only standing in the way." The insult landed exactly where he aimed it. In the old bruise beneath her ribs were years of bus seats, narrow hallways, and rich women's glances had taught her to apologize for taking space. Clara's fingers flexed once, then stilled. She kept her hand on the table because the table was cold, real, and beneath her palm the wet streak had thinned the ink enough to show what Victor had covered. Mateo said nothing. That was almost worse. He leaned back in his velvet chair, one finger resting beside a silver fountain pen, watching Victor humiliate her without interrupting, watching Clara decide whether she would break. His bodyguards watched him. Nikolai's envoy watched the pen. Victor saw all of it and smiled wider. "This is why protocols exist," he said. "A servant hears a foreign word, panics, and suddenly 12 trained interpreters are wrong because she wiped the table." He flipped the folder open with theatrical patience, angling it so the nearest men could see the official seal, but Clara could not see the full line. "Read this, then. If you belong here." Clara looked at the page, not directly at the line he pointed to, at the shadow under his thumb, at the blue ink bleeding faintly through the damp crescent her glove had left. 3 scripts overlapped in the margin, one formal, one hurried, one almost hidden. Her pulse slowed. Victor had not mistranslated one phrase. He had buried a second condition beneath the first. Mateo's pen shifted against the marble with a soft silver click. The sound cut through Clara like a blade, leaving its sheath. If he signed before she spoke, the debt would not stay on paper. It would move through docks, trucks, warehouses, men with guns, and bodies no interpreter would have to count. Victor tapped the line. "Well," he asked, "or did the gloves do the reading for you?" Clara's eyes lifted to Mateo's hand, then back to the margin only she seemed to see. The hidden word was not neutral. It was not winter. It was execution. Execution was the word Victor had hidden under his thumb, and Mateo's silver pen was already moving toward the signature line. Clara did not think about fear. She moved. Her yellow-gloved palm came down flat on the black marble, covering the bottom of the page before the pen could touch it. 3 guns shifted at once. A chair scraped back. Victor's face twisted with triumph, as if her hand on the contract proved every ugly thing he had said about servants and boundaries. "There," he snapped. She just interfered with a binding negotiation. Clara's heart slammed, so hard she felt in her fingertips, but she kept her palm where it was. The damp rubber squeaked against the paper. Her body, the same body men mocked as too much for narrow halls and invisible labor, became weight, presence, a living barricade between Matteo De Luca and a lie dressed in ink. "Don't sign," she said again, lower this time. "The word is execution." The room changed temperature. Mateo's pen stopped a breath above her glove. Victor laughed too quickly. A childish translation. Clara turned the folder with her free hand, not toward herself, but toward the center of the table where every man could see the margin. Russian first, she said, and the syllables came out clean enough that Nikolai's envoy's eyes cut toward her. Исполненный. Enforcement. But in this clause, tied to a blood debt, it means execution of a sentence. She tapped the second mark. Italian. Condanna, not obligation. Polish shorthand in the corner. Promise made with a knife behind the back. Greek initial beside the seal. Witness required after refusal. Arabic notation near the date. Transfer upon death. Spanish ledger code on the lower edge. Father's unpaid debt. Albanian doc marked beside the route number. No neutral passage. Ukrainian initials under Victor's stamp. Confirm removal. Each language landed like a glass breaking in a church. Not loud. Final. By the 6th, the men who had smirked at her gloves were no longer smiling. By the 8th, Nikolai's envoy had gone gray around the lips. Claire did not look proud. She looked steady. Her voice remained soft, almost tired, as if the miracle they were witnessing had been built from years of being ignored by people who spoke freely over her bent back. Victor lunged for the page. She memorized fragment from the footage. He barked. She's performing. Mateo lifted one hand. No one touched Clara. No one touched the folder. The silence that followed belonged to him, but the truth inside it belonged to her. Clara slid one gloved finger to the line Victor had translated as winter neutrality. This does not keep the docs neutral, she said. It makes your signature an admission that your father refused Orlov's death clause. The moment you sign, they can call inheritance, not war. A low curse moved through the bodyguards. Nikolai's envoy finally stopped pretending not to understand. Victor's polished mask cracked, then rebuilt itself into contempt. Or, he said, the cleaner is being used by Orlov to poison this table. Clara looked at him then. If I were Orlov's, I would have let him keep smiling. The room went utterly still. Mateo set the silver pen down on the marble, slow enough for the sound to become a verdict. His eyes moved from the covered signature line to Clara's yellow glove, then to Victor's pale face. For the first time, he did not look through her uniform or around her body. He looked directly at the woman, holding his empire back from the edge. Lock the doors, Mateo said, and bring me every translation Victor Hale approved tonight. Lock the doors, Mateo de Luca had said, and the sound of steel bolts sliding into place turned the boardroom from a negotiation into a cage. No one breathed easily after that. A bodyguard gathered Victor Hale's approved translations from the side credenza and laid them across the black marble like evidence in a private trial. Clara's yellow glove still covered the unsigned contract, damp rubber pressed to the word that would have buried Mateo's empire under his father's debt. Victor tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. You were letting a janitor contaminate diplomatic material because she recited dock slang. Mateo did not look at him. He watched Clara instead, not with kindness, not yet, but with the focused stillness of a man studying a blade he had almost stepped on. Take your hand off the contract, he said. Clara's stomach tightened. Around her, guns stayed half-hidden under jackets. Victor's smile began to return. Clara lifted her palm slowly. The page stuck for half a second to the damp glove, then settled flat against the marble. Her hand left a yellow crescent of cleaning solution across the lower margin, making the hidden ink shine brighter under the chandelier. Mateo's eyes moved to it. So did Clara's. Victor did not notice until it was too late. Random page, Mateo ordered. A guard slid a translation sheet from the middle of the stack. Not the top, not the one Clara had already touched. Mateo turned it toward her with 2 fingers. Not the language, the lie. Clara understood the test. He was not asking whether she could perform. He was asking whether she could see the shape of betrayal without being led to it. She leaned forward, the seams of her gray uniform pulling at her shoulders, her heavy body steady against the edge of the table, while every man waited for her to stumble. She did not. Her gaze moved over Victor's neat English, then to the original notation beneath it. He changed timing into permission, she said. Victor's face went still. Clara tapped the page once. This says Orlov's convoy moves after confirmation. Victor wrote that confirmation is already implied. That gives them the right to enter DeLuca-controlled warehouses before your men authorize the gate. A curse slipped from one of Mateo's guards. Mateo took the page from Clara and handed it to his legal man without looking away from her. Again, another sheet, another line. Clara's voice stayed low. He changed witness into hostage. Another. He changed storage into seizure. Another. He changed refusal into insult. By the fourth page, the room no longer doubted that Victor had made errors. It feared how many of those errors had already become orders. Victor's polished mask cracked around the eyes. She could have been coached. Clara finally turned to him. By who? The mop bucket. No one laughed, because she had not said it like a joke. She said it like a woman tired of being mistaken for furniture while men hid knives under grammar. Mateo's gaze dropped to her glove, to the damp crescent that had revealed what credentials had concealed. Something in his expression changed then, small and lethal. He did not soften. He recalculated. Miss Whitmore, he said, until I know where his lies end, you do not leave my sight. Victor stepped forward as if to seize the papers from her. Clara planted both gloved hands on a marble and did not move. Mateo's voice cut across the room, quiet enough to freeze blood. Touch her, Victor, and I will start my audit with your fingers. Victor did not move after Mateo's threat, but the tendons in his jaw jumped as if something inside him had snapped. Clara kept both yellow-gloved hands on the black marble, feeling the table's cold bite through rubber, feeling every stair in the room change shape around her. 5 minutes ago, those eyes had weighed her uniform, her size, her place in the room. Now they weighed what would happen if she spoke again. Mateo stood for the first time. The simple act shifted the air. Bodyguard straightened. Nikolai's envoy lowered his gaze. Victor's fingers curled against his empty palm. Mateo crossed the distance between his chair and Clara without hurry, black suit moving like shadow over stone, and stopped beside her close enough that she could smell smoke, leather, and the faint iron edge of danger. You will stay where I can see you, he said. Clara looked up at him, her throat tight but her voice steady. I'll help you find what he changed. I won't become another file on your table. A flicker passed through Mateo's eyes. Not anger. Something more complicated. Respect. Maybe buried under suspicion. Good, he said. Files can be stolen. People who know their worth are harder. The words should not have warmed her. They came from a man who could lock doors with one finger. Still, they landed differently than Victor's polished contempt. Mateo turned to his guards. North Archive. Now. She walks beside me, not behind you. The order rolled through the room like a new rule being written. Clara felt it before she understood it. He had not freed her, but he had moved her from evidence to witness. It was not safety. It was proximity. A bodyguard opened the private door behind Mateo's chair, revealing a narrow passage paneled in dark walnut and lined with framed harbor maps. Clara stepped away from the table, and for one humiliating second, the damp glove clung to the marble with a faint squeak. No one laughed. Mateo's gaze dropped to the crescent mark she had left behind. Leave it, he said when a guard reached for a cloth. That stain has told me more truth tonight than my interpreter. Victor's face went bloodless. Clara followed Mateo into the passage, aware of the velvet silence closing behind them, aware of her own heavy steps on the polished floor, aware that this world had doors within doors, and none of them opened for women like her unless a dangerous man decided they should. In the archive, stacks of translated manifests waited beneath green bankers' lamps. Mateo placed one chair beside his, not across the room. Clara did not sit until he did. Boundary, not obedience. His mouth almost changed shape at that, but he said nothing. For the next minutes, Clara read fragments while Mateo listened. She did not perform. She pointed to patterns, a changed date, a softened threat, a witness turned into property. Each correction made Mateo quieter. Each silence made the guards more afraid. Then Clara found the cleaning roster folded inside a shipping manifest. Her own name was circled in Victor's neat blue ink. Beside it, in Ukrainian shorthand, someone had written 2 words, "Remove witness." Mateo saw it at the same time she did. His hand closed over the edge of the paper, not touching her, but close enough that the air between their fingers felt charged. "Miss Whitmore," he said softly, "now you understand why you cannot walk out alone." Clara stared at her circled name, then at the man who had just become both protection and danger. "Then don't ask me to trust you," she whispered. "Give me a reason to trust the next room. Remove witness." The 2 words sat beside Clara's circled name like a sentence already waiting for her body. Before Mateo could answer her challenge, every screen in the North Archive flashed from Harbor Manifest to the live feed of the boardroom. Victor Hale stood at the black marble table, with Clara's damp crescent still shining beside the unsigned contract, one hand raised like a wounded professional begging order from animals. Beside him, Nikolai's envoy spoke into a secured line, and Victor translated for the men who had returned to their seats with guns under their jackets. "He says the cleaning woman is Orlov's planted witness," Victor announced, smooth again, almost beautiful in his betrayal. "He says Matteo De Luca has allowed a servant to contaminate the table, obstruct the agreement, and endanger neutral passage. By council protocol, the witness must be removed before negotiations continue." Clara felt the archive tilt, but her feet stayed planted. Matteo's bodyguards reached for their weapons. Matteo did not. He looked at the screen, then at Clara, as if measuring whether fear would make her smaller. It did not. Her yellow gloves curled once at her sides. "That isn't what he said," she whispered. Matteo's eyes sharpened. "Then tell me what he said." "Not here." Clara stepped toward the archive door before anyone could stop her. "If Victor is lying in front of them, I have to correct him in front of them." A guard blocked her path. Matteo raised one finger, the same deadly stillness from the boardroom returning. The guard moved. Clara walked back through the walnut passage beside Matteo. Not behind him, every heavy step sounding too human against polished floors built for men who thought power meant never having to hurry. When the private door opened, the room turned on her like a loaded weapon. Victor's eyes lit with satisfaction. "There she is," he said, still wearing the gloves she used to mark the contract. Clara looked at the black marble table. The yellow crescent remained where her palm had been, catching chandelier light. Victor thought it condemned her. Clara saw what he had missed. The cleaning solution had thinned more ink along the lower edge, revealing a second line beneath his stamp. She stepped forward, ignoring the way several men shifted back, as if her presence itself had become dangerous. "You didn't translate the protocol," she said. "You invented one." Victor laughed. "Please, enlighten the council." Clara laid both gloved hands on the marble. Not on the contract this time. On the table itself. Steady. Unmoving. In Russian, he asked whether the witness had been secured. In Ukrainian, your margin says remove witness. But in Albanian dot code, the same mark means remove witness from public record, not remove her from the room. "You changed paperwork into punishment." Nikolai's envoy swore under his breath. Clara turned her head toward him before Victor could speak. And he just confirmed it. Silence slammed down so hard even the chandelier seemed to stop glittering. Matteo's gaze moved from Clara to Victor with lethal patience. Victor's mouth opened, but Clara was not finished. "He is not asking to continue negotiations," she said. "He is asking whether you have already erased me from the roster, because once I disappear from the record, anything done to me becomes deniable." The men around the table no longer looked at her as a cleaner. They looked at her as the one person standing between a forged protocol and a sanctioned murder. Matteo stepped beside her, close but not touching. "Council rules require a verified voice for disputed language," he said quietly. "Victor's is compromised." Every face turned toward Clara. Victor went pale, and for the first time that night, the De Luca table waited for the cleaning woman to speak. The De Luca table waited for the cleaning woman to speak, and for one impossible second, the richest criminals in New York looked less like kings than boys caught lying in church. Clara Whitmore stood at the black marble with her yellow gloves still on, the damp crescent of cleaning solution shining beside the unsigned contract like a witness mark no one could erase. Victor Hale opened his mouth, but Matteo De Luca did not look at him. "No," Matteo said softly. One word. The room obeyed. Clara drew one breath. Her throat burned. Her knees ached. Her uniform pulled at her shoulders. Every old humiliation pressed against her at once. The women who slid their purses away from her on buses, the hotel guests who left dirty glasses beside her without saying please, the men who spoke over her in languages they assumed she could never understand. But she did not shrink. She laid one gloved finger on the exposed line and translated it exactly. First into English, then back through the phrases Victor had twisted until even Nikolai's envoy could not hide behind silence. "The witness is not to be removed from the room," she said. "The witness is to be removed from the record after the agreement is signed." That means Victor Hale was not protecting council protocol. He was creating a hole where my name would disappear. A murmur moved around the table, low and afraid. Clara slid the next page forward. He changed convoy timing into permission. He changed warehouse storage into seizure. He changed refusal into insult. He changed inheritance into blood debt. And here, her gloved hand stopped beside Victor's blue stamp. He certified all of it as neutral language. Victor's face had gone the color of ash, but he still tried to stand straight. "This is theater," he said. "A servant with a talent for accents does not outrank 12 professionals." "No," Matteo said, rising behind Clara, "but truth outranks you." The words landed harder than a slap. Matteo lifted 2 fingers, and his men moved with terrifying calm. One collected Victor's phone. Another took his briefcase. A third removed the De Luca access pin from Victor's lapel, as if stripping a false medal from a traitor. Matteo's legal man placed every approved translation in a sealed black folder. "Every contract he touched is frozen," Matteo said. "Every payment is held. Every counsel he advised will receive Miss Whitmore's verified corrections by dawn." Victor's polished control finally cracked. "You're going to let her rewrite underworld policy?" His eyes swung to Clara, desperate and poisonous. Her, in rubber gloves. Clara felt the room look at her gloves again. This time, no one laughed. Matteo stepped beside her, close enough for the edge of his sleeve to shadow her hand, but not close enough to claim what she had not given. "Those gloves revealed the sentence you buried," he said. "That stain told the truth before you did." Then he turned to the entire council. "From this night forward, no De Luca agreement, oath, route, debt, or surrender is binding until Clara Whitmore hears it, reads it, and confirms it." Victor Hale spoke for this table and sold his voice. Miss Whitmore saved it. The silence changed. It was no longer the silence that erased her. It was the silence that waited. Matteo picked up the silver pen Victor had nearly used to bury his empire and placed it in front of Clara on the black marble. Not as a gift, as authority. "She is not my cleaner," he said. "She is the voice of the De Luca table." One by one, men who had looked through her lowered their eyes. Nikolai's envoy pushed the corrected protocol toward Clara with both hands. Victor did not kneel, but when the bodyguards took him by the arms, his perfect suit seemed suddenly too large for the man inside it. Clara looked at the pen, then at the yellow gloves Victor had mocked, then at the crescent mark still glowing under the chandelier. She did not take the gloves off. She signed the verification beside her own name, not hidden on a roster, not circled for removal, but written cleanly where every man could see it. Matteo watched her with dark, dangerous quiet, and for the first time that night, Clara did not feel like a woman allowed into the room. She felt like the reason the room had to listen.